August 17th, 2005, was supposed to be a night defined by optimism and quiet celebration. Jennifer Cave was 21 years old, standing at the edge of a future she had worked hard to earn. She had just begun a new job at a law firm in Austin, Texas, a milestone that symbolized independence, ambition, and the promise of a stable life ahead. That evening, she sent a text message to her mother, Sharon Cave, telling her she was going out to celebrate with a friend she had known for several months, a University of Texas honors student named Colton Pitonyak. It was a simple, ordinary message, the kind parents receive every day without a second thought. Jennifer expected to come home. Her mother expected to hear from her again. Neither could have imagined that this small exchange would become the final trace of Jennifer's living voice. Jennifer was not reckless or impulsive. Friends and family described her as responsible, kind, and thoughtful, someone who valued her relationships and kept close ties with her parents. She had no history of disappearing without explanation, no pattern of risky behavior. She had plans for the next day, for the next year, for the life she was just beginning to build. When she left her home that night, there was no sense of danger, no hint that she was stepping into the final hours of her life. Colton Pitonyak appeared, at least on the surface, to be an ideal companion. Intelligent, articulate, and academically accomplished, he projected the image of a young man on a prestigious path. To outsiders, he was charming and confident, a model university student with a promising future. But behind that polished exterior, Colton's life was quietly unraveling. Drugs and alcohol had become central to his daily existence. Friend would later describe him as paranoid, emotionally unstable, and increasingly detached from reality. The contrast between his public image and his private behavior was stark, and few around him fully understood how deep the instability ran. Jennifer arrived at Colton's apartment around 10 o'clock that night. Neighbors later recalled seeing the two together, laughing and drinking, nothing about the scene raising immediate alarm. The early hours of the evening appeared normal, even cheerful. There were no screams, no obvious signs of conflict. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like a simple celebration between young adults enjoying each other's company. At some point, however, the mood shifted. What exactly happened inside the apartment remains known only in fragments, reconstructed through evidence and testimony. Investigators believe an argument took place, likely fueled by intoxication. Colton was heavily under the influence of drugs and alcohol, his judgment impaired, his emotions volatile. Jennifer, according to prosecutors, may have rejected him in some way during the argument. In a stable state of mind, such a moment might have ended in discomfort or disappointment. In Colton's fractured mental state, it became something far more dangerous. Sometime after midnight, a neighbor heard a single gunshot. Just one. The sound cut briefly through the quiet of the apartment complex and then faded. No one immediately called the police. No one realized that in that instant, Jennifer Cave's life had been violently ended. Jennifer never returned home. The following morning, concern began to grow. Sharon Cave tried calling her daughter. There was no answer. She sent text messages, then called again. Still nothing. As hours passed, worry turned into fear. Jennifer's silence was deeply out of character. Later that day, Jennifer's car was found parked outside Colton's apartment building. The sight of it intensified the dread. The car was there, but Jennifer was not. Nearly 24 hours had passed without any contact, and the sense that something was terribly wrong became impossible to ignore. Sharon Cave, accompanied by a friend, went to the apartment. When repeated attempts to get an answer failed, they forced their way inside. What they found would forever alter their lives. Jennifer's body was discovered in the bathtub. She had been shot multiple times in the arm, the chest, and the head. The violence did not end with her death. Her body had been dismembered in an attempt to conceal the crime. The apartment showed signs of a frantic, incomplete effort to clean up blood and evidence, a chilling indication that someone had tried to erase what had happened and failed. Colton Pitonyak was nowhere to be found. Security camera footage would later trace his movements after the murder. Calm enough to carry out routine actions, he withdrew cash from an ATM. He then met up with Laura Hall, his on-again, off-again girlfriend. Together, they made a deliberate decision to flee, crossing the border into Mexico and traveling to the city of Piedras Negras. For 5 days, they stayed there, drinking heavily, attempting to avoid capture while the reality of the crime loomed behind them. Their flight was not an act of blind panic. It was organized and intentional, a clear effort to evade responsibility. Meanwhile, back in Austin, investigators were piecing together the evidence left behind in the apartment. The brutality of the crime and the attempt to cover it up painted a disturbing picture of calculated indifference to human life. Authorities eventually tracked Colton and Laura down. When they were arrested, there was no resistance. By then, the evidence against them was overwhelming. The trial exposed the full scope of what had happened that night. Prosecutors presented a narrative of a drug-fueled confrontation that spiraled into lethal violence. Colton Pitonyak, under the influence and emotionally unstable, had shot Jennifer Cave during an argument. What followed was hours of methodical behavior aimed at hiding the truth. Laura Hall's involvement began after the killing, when she assisted in dismembering Jennifer's body and helped Colton escape across the border. Jurors were confronted with graphic evidence, witness testimony, and digital records that left little room for doubt. The case was not built on speculation, but on a trail of actions that demonstrated consciousness of guilt. The jury ultimately convicted Colton Pitonyak of murder, sentencing him to 55 years in prison. Laura Hall received a 10-year sentence for her role in assisting his escape and tampering with evidence. For Jennifer's family, the verdicts offered accountability, but not closure. No sentence could restore what had been taken. Sharon Cave continues to visit her daughter's grave each year, honoring a life cut short and carrying the weight of unanswered questions that no courtroom can resolve. Jennifer's absence is felt not only in anniversaries and memories, but in the life she never had the chance to live. The murder of Jennifer Cave remains one of Austin's most haunting true crime cases, not only because of its brutality, but because of how abruptly normalcy gave way to irreversible tragedy. A celebration became a crime scene. A trusted friend became a killer. A single gunshot marked the end of a young woman's future. Beyond the individual tragedy, the case also exposed uncomfortable truths about substance abuse, entitlement, and violence. It illustrated how quickly impaired judgment and emotional instability can escalate into irreversible harm. It forced a community to confront the reality that danger does not always come from strangers, but can emerge from people who appear safe, familiar, even admirable. Jennifer Cave was more than a victim in a criminal case. She was a daughter, a friend, and a young woman with ambitions and dreams. Her story endures because it demands remembrance, not as a statistic, but as a life stolen without reason. In remembering her, the hope remains that her story serves as a warning, a call to vigilance, and a reminder of the human cost behind headlines and court records. Her mother's grief continues, steady and enduring, carried quietly through each passing year. In that grief lives a refusal to let Jennifer be forgotten. The case may be closed in legal terms, but its emotional impact remains open, echoing through the lives of those who loved her and through a city that still remembers the night when a celebration ended in silence.